Let's talk about a rulebook that covers everything from a simple band-aid all the way to a life-saving pacemaker. Sounds massive, right? Well, that's exactly what the European Union created with its Medical Device Regulation, or MDR. Honestly, it's one of the biggest regulatory shakeups in a long time, and it is completely changing the game for healthcare technology. Here's a question for you. Think about that health app on your phone. Would you call it a medical device? A few years back, the answer would have been a pretty clear no. But under this new rulebook, the answer just might be yes. And that one question really shows you the incredible scope of what we're digging into today. So, why the huge change? Why go to all this trouble? To really get the MDR, you have to start with the why. What was the problem that this enormous regulation was built to solve? Right from the get-go, the MDR makes its mission totally clear. It's all about raising the bar for quality and safety. The whole idea is that if a device claims it can do something, that claim has to be backed by absolutely rock-solid, reliable data. No more gray areas. So just how big of a change are we talking about here? Well, it's not just a tweak, it's a fundamental shift. The old system was more like a collection of guidelines, and different countries could interpret them differently. The new MDR, it's a single binding law for everyone. And it moves away from just approving a device one time to what they call a total lifecycle approach. That means regulators are watching from the very first design sketch all the way to how that device is performing years down the line. Okay, so how does this actually work in practice? It all kicks off at the very beginning with the most basic questions. What exactly is this device, and who precisely is responsible for it? So, what even counts as a medical device? The definition is incredibly broad. It covers everything you'd expect, like surgical tools and implants. But here's the real game changer. The word software is right there in the definition. For the first time, a standalone app can officially be considered a medical device, and it has to follow all the same tough rules. And you might be surprised by how far this regulation reaches. It isn't just about things that treat diseases. A special part of the law, Annex 16, pulls in a whole bunch of products that have similar risk profiles, even if their purpose isn't strictly medical. We're talking cosmetic contact lenses, dermal fillers, even liposuction equipment. Yep, they all now have to meet these incredibly strict safety standards. Now, this is absolutely crucial. Not all devices are treated the same. They get sorted into 4 different classes based on how much risk they pose. It's a spectrum, from low-risk Class I stuff like Band-Aids, all the way up to high-risk Class 3 devices like pacemakers. And this one classification, it determines just how tough every single step of the approval process is going to be. At the absolute center of this whole system is the manufacturer. This is the company putting its name on the device, and under the MDR, they carry the ultimate responsibility. Risk management, clinical data, technical files, you name it, it's on them. The buck stops here, period. But what if the manufacturer is based outside of the EU? Well, that's where the authorized representative comes in. This is a legal entity located inside the union that acts as the official go-between for the company and the regulators. And critically, they actually share legal liability for defective products. This ensures there's always someone on EU soil who can be held accountable. And that chain of responsibility doesn't stop there. The MDR extends legal duties all the way down the supply chain to importers and distributors. They aren't just moving boxes anymore. Now they are legally required to be checkpoints, verifying compliance and helping with traceability. In this new system, pretty much everyone is a link in the fence of patient safety. So you've figured out what your device is, you know its risk class, and you know who's responsible. Now for what might be the biggest hurdle of all, proving it's safe and effective enough to earn that CE mark, which is basically the passport to the entire European market. For most devices, you can't just check a box and say you're compliant. You have to go through what's called a notified body. Think of them as the independent, highly regulated gatekeepers. They're private companies, but they are designated and constantly watched by national health authorities to make sure they are auditing manufacturers against the super strict requirements of the MDR. Now, for the higher-risk devices, the path to getting approved is incredibly intense. First, the manufacturer has to put together a mountain of technical documents and clinical evidence. Then, that whole file gets submitted to a notified body for a really deep audit. And for the highest-risk products, like a totally new kind of implant, there's yet another layer of review from an independent panel of EU experts. Only after you pass every single one of those checks do you get that CE certificate.
But here's the thing. Getting that CE mark isn't the finish line, not by a long shot. In fact, under the MDR, it's really just the starting gun. The regulation's biggest innovation might just be the system it creates for tracking devices after they've hit the market.
The core idea is simple: total traceability. The entire system is designed so you can track a single device from the factory floor all the way to a specific patient and then monitor how it's doing for its entire lifespan. The tool that makes all this possible is the Unique Device Identifier, or UDI. You can kind of think of it like a serial number on steroids. Every single device gets one. This code allows regulators, hospitals, and even patients to look up information about that one specific device, which makes things like managing recalls and tracking performance so much easier. And all that UDI data feeds into UDAMED, the EU's huge new central database. It registers every device, every manufacturer, every incident report. And here's the key part: a lot of it is public. This creates a level of transparency that has simply never existed before, letting doctors and patients see a device's track record for themselves. And finally, the MDR demands constant vigilance. In the past, a manufacturer might have just waited for problems to be reported. Not anymore. Now, they are legally required to proactively hunt for data on how their device is performing in the real world. This creates a never-ending feedback loop. Collect data, analyze it, and improve, over and over and over again.
So, after all that, what does this all mean for you? Beyond all the regulations and databases, let's just boil it down to the real-world impact on patients, doctors, and of course, the innovators creating these devices.
For patients, the promise is pretty clear: safer devices and a lot more transparency. For doctors, it means more reliable data to help them make better decisions. But for the innovators, the people building the next generation of tech, this is where the tension is. The path to market is now longer, it's more expensive, and it demands a much higher burden of proof than ever before.
And that really brings us to the fundamental trade-off at the very heart of this regulation. It has, without a doubt, created a framework for safer medical devices. But at what cost to innovation? The MDR has drawn a very clear line in the sand. The question for the future is whether that line is in exactly the right place.